Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares and post them online for fun. And today we're going to be mashing up two of my favorite franchises, Star Wars and Mega Man. I want to take Darth Vader and make him into the style of the Robot Masters from the Mega Man series. So now that these props have fulfilled their purpose, I'm going to go put them away and we can get started on some pixel art. Making various pixel art versions of Darth Vader is actually something I played around with before, a lot. I've done a tiny Darth, a sort of SNES-era inspired Darth, a neon 80s Saturday morning cartoon Darth, and I've even already attempted a Mega Man style Darth in the past. This one's from a few years ago, and while it was an accomplishment at the time, I think it fails to capture everything that the Mega Man style can offer. Really, the only thing going on with this one is that his boots are a little bit large, and why did I make him so purple? So for today, I want to study the art style of the SNES-era Mega Man games. I'm talking Mega Man 7, which is actually my personal favorite of the series, but also the X series games. Just looking at things like sprite construction, color count, and overall style, and then attempt another Darth that is hopefully more authentic to that style once I learn how it breaks down. So here I pulled some sprites from different Mega Man games that I think could be good references in creating a Darth Vader sprite. We've got Bass, Junkman, and Shademan from Mega Man 7, then there's Sigma and Storm Eagle from Mega Man X, and finally Colonel from Mega Man X4. This one was for the PlayStation and had more of a 3D rendered look than the others, but it's still a useful reference as a character with a lightsaber and a cool outfit. What jumps out to me, and is probably the reason why I love the art style of these games so much, is the cartoony look of the sprites. It's easy to see how they would translate to or from an anime look, like what's normally seen on the box art or the promo art. In pixel art, this look is achieved in large part by the use of black outlines in the sprite construction. The outlines here help separate the character sprite into sections of different costume elements, or things that are adjacent that will be assigned different colors. You can see that for the most part, the black outline alone is communicating most of the sprite design already. What's also interesting to note is that the sprite of Colonel from X4 has a very different approach and there's not much of an outline at all. The choice to not use outlines here helps give those sprites a more three-dimensional look and not feel as flat on the screen. It's a cool look and X4 is a gorgeous game, but for my purposes I want to stick to the cartoony outline look. Another quick thing to check is the sprite height. This will help determine what kinds of smaller details are possible, and where exactly Darth will fit in with his crew. The smallest sprite here is Bass at 48 pixels, and the tallest is Junkman at 73 pixels tall. Well, okay, technically Storm Eagle's the tallest, if you include his wings he's 84 pixels tall, but he's only 50 from head to toe, and that's what we need to consider for character comparison. And Darth Vader is a big guy, but I don't think he needs to be quite as tall as Junkman though. Maybe a tad taller than Sigma would be good. For overall style, the aesthetic I love is of course those big chunky boots. Something along the geometry of what Bass has is really the quintessential Mega Man look. I also love the accent details on sprites like Shademan and Storm Eagle, so might try to work that in as well, or maybe even the colored light effect that's on Junkman's boots. When it comes to style, I also like looking at the sprite silhouette. If you fill the entire character with black, you can kind of get a good read on their design just from the silhouette alone. So in this group, I like seeing the sharp geometry on the sprites like Shademan and Colonel. And look how you can still recognize Storm Eagle's confident pose with his arm across like that. I think that's really cool and it's just something to keep in mind when coming up with a cool pose for the Vader sprite. Stripping this idea back a bit further, we can also take a rudimentary look at the pose itself by overlaying a kind of stick figure onto the sprite. When I make a sprite, I usually start from a stick figure to quickly find an interesting pose, so deconstructing a finished sprite can also show you what works and what doesn't. Again, I really like the confident footing of Storm Eagle, and Junkman also, and probably want to stay away from ambiguous type of poses like Bass and Shademan here. Sigma and Colonel's poses here are also really great reference for just a character holding a lightsaber. Oh, by the way, for making characters holding a lightsaber or just a sword or any kind of weapon like that in general, it is best to stick with exact angles. If you notice on Sigma's blade, it's at a perfect 45-degree angle. That's because that's just a slope of 1 pixel segments. Colonel's blade is a different angle, but it still follows a perfect slope of repeating 2 pixel segments. If you try to go off angle and just kind of draw a random line, you're going to end up with jaggy bits and the weapon's not going to read cleanly. It's just something to think about when you're planning a pose for a character that has that sort of weapon. Lastly, I laid out the color palette from each sprite just to get a feel for how many colors are typically used. What I noticed is that the main parts of the costume use gradients of anywhere from 3 to 5 shades within each color group. And ironically, Shade Man, he's actually a great example of that. He's got 3 different shades for his main purple color, and then he also uses a white highlight for areas with extra shine. And the same kind of goes for his blue accent color too. Junkman's another great example, with sort of an extra wide gradient of black, white, and 4 gray tones to give lots of options for creating light gray and dark gray areas. And some great geometric lighting on his chunky shoulder pauldron. Just as a side note too, I also really love the rendering on his clamp hand there. For lightsaber effects, we can see 2 different examples here. So Sigma's blade has 3 colors. There's 2 shades of green with white at the center, and Colonel's blade is just kind of a simple white center with a single layer of red pixels around it. I feel like there's more punch to the coloring in Sigma's saber, so I'm going to plan for that level of coloring. Alright, so with all those ideas in mind, I just put together like a starter color palette for what I think I'll need for Vader. So there's a simple gradient of black, white, and then 3 gray tones for his main colors. And then I got a few yellow shades for accent trimming, and finally some 2-tone red, green, and blue for additional costume details. I think too we'll grab one of those stick figures just to have a rough place to start and to make sure that we're staying within the proportion of the character set. So with all that, I think we're good to go, so let's get to pixeling. And just cutting this in real quick so that we can talk about Vader's design that we need to incorporate. I realized I didn't do that. Sorry, that's my cat. So we've got the armor here. There's a chest. I don't think that controls his breathing. I think he got that off of an arcade machine or something. There's the belt. Looks like it has a speaker on it. There's these side packs. I think he keeps snacks in those. I don't know. Cape, boots, gloves, you know, iconic helmet design, and the lightsaber. So with that, let's get to pixeling. Alright, so to start the Vader sprite, the first thing I did was take that stick figure and just put it into an interesting pose based on what I liked from looking at the other bosses. I decided to have him kind of clutching his lightsaber behind him and then have the other arm be a buster cannon that's raised up. I know it's kind of weird to consider Vader with a gun for a hand, but he's got robotic limbs anyway, so it's kind of plausible. At least within the Mega Man world, right? In my original Mega Darth 1.0 from the start of this video, one of the shortcomings was that the boot style didn't really match the source material. So for this one, I measured out a few foot sizes from the reference sprites just for guidance. I think I used a width of 20 pixels to start on Vader here, which looks kind of crazy when it's just a stick figure, but it quickly starts to shape together by the time you add more of the leg. So you see at this point, I'm really just using the outline color to create a basic silhouette, and then erasing to carve out the main details. Since this will be an outline sprite like the references, I wanted to spend a lot of time finding a strong outline that communicates most of the sprite details before adding color. You'll also see throughout that I flip the sprite to its mirror image frequently. Often what happens is your eyes get used to seeing the art from the original perspective, so flipping the canvas just kind of refreshes your perspective and can help you catch wonky anatomy and things like that. And since I have the reference sprites here too, I'd pop him up sometimes to that set just to see how he lines up and to see if his style was being consistent with those guys. For Darth's Buster Cannon, I figured it was a perfect opportunity to add a bit more of a Star Wars reference and made it into something inspired by the E11 blaster, you know, the rifle that the Stormtroopers use? Where it's got kind of this ribbing along the barrel. I don't know if that's the right term to use, probably not. But I also added a tiny scope to the top just to convey a bit more from that. When digging into the detail and decoration on the boot here, I erased the silhouette just to leave the outline pixels, then filled back in some pixels for strong shading towards the dark and curved areas of the boots. I refined the outline to try and get some sharper language out of the boot design, just to have it looking nice and villainous, and then finish them off with some details like the triangles and the grip on the bottom. For his helmet, I figured the best approach was just to erase pixels from the silhouette to indicate areas that are raised that are going to catch light and sort of provide the details of his mask. So you can kind of see those angles on his cheeks and the front of his mask, and then that flat edge going along the side of his head. With those areas clearly visible, the rest of the helmet can kind of play within those gradient colors, and should leave the design fairly readable otherwise. It's kind of funny how much I keep coming back to the boots, like I really wanted to get them right on version 2.0 here, which probably leaves them looking a little overworked at times, but it's alright, I do clean them up by the time this is all said and done. For adding the color, I started with just a few of the gray tones. I wanted to drop in a few different shades of gray just to make various parts of his outfit stand out and maybe even convey different materials. So his shoulder pads and upper chest piece are in sort of a lighter gray, whereas his belt is in a darker gray. And then for his upper legs, I gave it kind of a stripe pattern just to show a bit of texture. I used the yellow and orange to make kind of a gold trim on his boots. I just thought that'd be kind of a nice detail and something else that sort of pops. And I used the 2 red colors to give him these glowing eyes. I think it's kind of a cool look for this style, and I can just picture walking into a dark boss room and just seeing those glowing eyes. Then maybe like his lightsaber lights up and lights the rest of the area. Yeah, that'd be sweet. And the last thing I did here was add in the colored light details and then roughed out the cape. For the cape, I just tried to have it fill up space that was open, so it's just kind of flowing in a way that adds more to the silhouette. And I gave it a ripped look towards the back, so it kind of had these like sharp edges coming off of it. Again, you know, just to have that villainous silhouette. A villainous silhouette, that'd be a good band name. I'm taking dibs. Alright, so let's take a look at the finished sprite for Mega Darth 2.0, aka Vader Man. Alright, and here's the full sprite again with some of the checkpoints from along the way. Just thought I'd break down some of the finishing touches and kind of compare back to the original objectives going into this. So once again, the process to design this sprite involves starting with the stick figure pose and then building the silhouette and line work on that skeleton before adding color and refining the whole thing. In finalizing the color palette, I added a slight purple hue to the main gradient, rather than sticking with those pure gray tones that I set up initially. I just always like having a slight color to things, even if it's something like black or gray. I like adding just a touch of blue or purple to it. You can just kind of sneak it in there with low saturation and it helps give a bit more appeal in my opinion. I also added an extra color to use for his cape so that it was differentiated from the rest of the outfit. Oh, and another thing, if you notice the boots between these two, I just decided to get rid of those bright red lights on the boots. Like I mentioned earlier, I kind of overworked them, and that extra lighting detail wasn't really necessary with all the other lights on his costume already. So let's go ahead and take a look at our 4 sprite design categories from earlier. That's the pose, outline, silhouette, and the sprite height. This sprite ended up being 64 pixels tall, putting him somewhere between the Junkman and Sigma sprites. So that feels about right. I also really like how the overall silhouette came out. There's lots of those sharp points that keep him very scary looking, I guess. If there's one weird thing about the silhouette, it's probably the way the cape curves out in front of his body, but I feel like it needed to drape there anyway, so it's not too big of a deal. Comparing him with the original reference bosses, I think he fits in fairly well. I mean, he's darker in tone, like both in color and subject matter wise, but that was to be expected a bit. Stylistically though, I'm pleased with how he looks against the others, considering I'm not the artist who made that game, I'm just some guy who attempted a similar look after studying those ones. And finally, let's put him up on the shelf with my other Darth sprites. Oh dang, he's facing the wrong way against those guys. One sec. There we go. So, overall, Mega Darth 2.0 is looking very unique in the set, and he's got some nice improvements over 1.0, and I just feel better about it knowing that it was attempted with a closer attention to how the actual Mega Man sprites are put together. And now these 5 Darth sprites make for an even weirder looking Pokemon evolution chart too, so that's cool as well. Alright, that's all I got for this one. Thank you for watching. I know that was kind of an extended process to design a single sprite, but now that we know, we can maybe design some other character mashups like Luke Skywalker as Mega Man, maybe Princess Leia's role, maybe Boba Fett as... you know, I can't think of anybody that he would mash up with. I'll have to think about that. Anyway, thank you for watching, take care, and keep it square.